Budget committee meetings of order. Probably should have a flag salute. Go ahead and sit again. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thanks everyone. Our first item on our agenda before we get to the budget is election of officers. And officers, as I understand, our budget chair Sheldon and budget vice chair for the budget committee, not URA. That would be Cameron and Councilor Martinez. Do I have nominations?
I move to approve Bruce Sheldon as the chair and Cameron Martinez as the vice chair.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, it's been moved by Councilor Mayor Lenny and seconded by Councilor Kendall to elect the chair as Russ Sheldon and vice chair is Cameron Martinez. So Councilor Sheldon, Councilor Martinez. Do I have any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. Hearing none opposed, the motion is carried. Thank you. And with that, we have a PowerPoint. We're going to work on presumably the 2023-2025 City of North Plains budget for the ensuing term. I'll turn it over.
Thank you. There we go. Should be. Thank you, Chair Sheldon. And hi, Robin. Hi, Councilor Papin online. If any time the audio isn't great, just let us know. Okay. Can you hear me? Fine. Yeah, this thing's really loud, so I was hoping so. Okay. All right. And any time you have questions or feedback, just maybe raise the hand because we'll have the slides up. We may not be able to see them. Okay. So these guys down here, slide that around. Okay, well, good evening, Budget Committee, councilors. Thanks again for being here. We're getting familiar with each other this week. There is no doubt about it. And tonight, let the record show, Budget Committee member Simmons has arrived. Thanks for joining us. You hit the first slide, so you're right on time.
Said right door and it was locked. You can bring up, yeah, if you want to get it closer. You can.
Sit over here to the lunch area and your name tag down.
He's usually even good about saying if he's going to play or not.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here tonight on a sunny evening. These are few and far between, so appreciate that. So what we are going to discuss tonight is the proposed 2023 through 2025 biennial budget. This is our second go around with a biennial budget. We're just a couple months away from finishing our first venture into biennial budgeting, and it's actually went pretty well. I think we've yet to even have a supplemental budget in these 2 years. So that shows that at least from the spending side, we were pretty close to what we had tried to project a couple of years ago. But we will, finance director has gone over several times some areas where we will need to do a supplemental, especially in planning with all the UGB activity, but that will come in May. So tonight we'll talk about these next 2 years and what's proposed. So here's our standard disclaimer, what you're getting into as a budget committee, the roles and responsibilities, and this is the proposed calendar on the right side. The budget was released last week, and we're here on the 19th at our second meeting. And then if we have future meetings, if necessary, the schedule is there. The reason we highlight May 16th, obviously, is because the local option levy is on the ballot, ballot measure 34-322. And that will have an impact to the proposed budget. And then obviously, prior to June 30th, a budget must be adopted because the fiscal year starts the next day. Just a quick thank you to everyone, council members and members of the public on the budget committee. And we had a couple that we know couldn't be here tonight. So thank you to those that are here. This is recorded, and I know a few of them plan to watch this recording later. The next couple slides are really going to frame what we talked about in March, which was the intent of that. If you remember, kind of a budget committee primer of what was to come, really framing a lot of the activity, the resources and our expenditures aligned with the council's goals that you all have worked on last year. We did some streamlining from, I think it was 7 goals prior to that to really create 3 goals with several outcomes. And the first one is about community engagement and bringing people together. So there are some activities related to that. And I really think last council meeting, Councilor Smith brought up one about a Citizens Academy that would be a good sort of budget consideration in this next biennium as well. Managing growth in an intentional way. We've been doing a lot of that, especially with the economic opportunities analysis, looking at more URA activity and looking at a downtown plan and just trying to make the community more livable overall. That's goal number 2. And then goal 3 is especially relatable to a budget because you're trying to align services with the growth that we are expecting, the growth and the changes. And that involves a local option levy, it involves growth in facilities, and really all the services that more and more community members come to expect. Another highlight, we also wanted to reflect some of the community survey results in this budget as well. And here on the left side are some of those that are most prevalent, whether that's extended police coverage, utilizing the URA for more shopping and services, and then the possibility of parks and recreational activities, trail maintenance, and just more sort of outdoor activities for families and residents. And these were just the top priorities of the next 5 years. So it's good to be doing a biennial budget, and then we can see how much we can take a chunk out of some of these over 2 years. I'm not going to go through these because this is what we went through 2 months ago, but these are some of the top points that in themes that we'll probably be coming back to within the budget are definitely reflected in there. The levy, proposed local option levy is one of those, and how that would affect resources, and especially the general fund, UG banning, and the outcome of a levy have an impact with water rates too, because remember, one of the things we want to do is eliminate the water fund having to pay for general fund. There's ARPA programming, spending the rest of that in the next 2 years. Washington County, we just heard from Commissioner Willie about some of their budget challenges and how does that impact some of our services. We did a third-party compensation study. The city hadn't done one in 5 years, so we worked with PSU to pinpoint 9 peer communities within the county and within the sort of broader metro region that are either our size or within the same drive shed, to really benchmark where we are competitively Some areas we know we won't be able to compete with larger agencies with more resources, and some we know that we can, and we're all pulling from the same talent pool. And I have experienced that firsthand several times the last year trying to hire people. So we wanted to be more competitive there. We created had some new funds and new departments. One's boards and commissions. We'll get to the Urban Renewal Agency later with some of those activities. Yeah, new fund, and then lots of capital projects to talk about too. I think this is probably the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to Bill to he can start his talk tonight. And he doesn't have any water, so he's a brave man. I don't know how he's going to keep his throat dry, but these are the budget implications. Just a recap of $1.65 local option levy and why we sort of landed on that. It's not only to promote and fund overnight police coverage, which has been a community goal, but it's also to shrink this pie slice of public safety from 48% down to about 33%. Shrinking that, it makes it just a more sustainable general fund, and it ends this water fund subsidy to the general fund. So this is a I guess I'm remiss a couple more slides, then I'll hand it over to Bill. But this is what we're talking about here. If a local option levy in May is successful, these are sort of the outcomes of that. More coverage, a rebalanced general fund, a water fund that is no longer subsidizing the general fund. If it's unsuccessful, we come back at the end of May, we'll have some decisions to make on where to scale back, either in police, determining what sort of solutions we need for our general fund, and do we return to the water fund, helping the general fund. So we'll get into all of that. Hello, Chris. Thanks for joining us. Okay, and again, we're a few years into expenditure control budgeting, and it's went pretty well. You'll see one department later on, the library, that had a good amount of carryover savings to use for this biennial budget in these 2 fiscal years coming up. In the old days, if your department saved, hey, great, it would go back to the general fund, but that's not how we do it now. We basically treat every department as an enterprise fund. So if you manage expenses well, you get to keep and carry over those savings. And if you remember these days, this was early COVID. This was our the blood splatter sheet where we kind of just showed everything. But the highlight here is these are what the pie slices represent. Your unrestricted share of the general fund. So in this scenario, the library was getting 28%, in addition to the other restricted things like fees and fines, WCCLS money, donations and grants. So that was what all that was about. It was dedicating our pie slices to the different departments through the general fund revenues. Okay, we'll talk a bit about our enterprise funds, streets and water, a new Jesse Mays Community Center Fund, ARPA, vehicles and equipment, and then all of our 8 capital funds. We have a new one we added for the Public Works building to better account for those expenses for the next biennium. This is really small to read, but it is in the budget. Just kind of captures in one page all of the capital projects.
In here, I am going to try to speak slowly, but I promise speaking clearly and concisely. So let's start with the general fund.
I think the internet dropped.
Andy and I are going to kind of take on different big components. I plan to walk through the general fund, and then the streets fund and the water fund. And then the new Jesse Mays Community Center Fund, then Andy will kind of walk through the capital project funds because it's far more heavily involved in the big projects that they all will be paying for.
We're having some internet stability issues for the moment, so everyone online, that's what is happening. I don't know when it's going to return either.
So Andy, this is Robin. It has cut out a few times and then come back, the audio part, for those of us online. But it seems to be okay now, the audio.
Thanks. Not using Wi-Fi is good. I always turn mine off on my phone. Yeah, the internet's just being really unstable, so apologize to everyone online. We're gonna have to restart the program. Well, Comcast was supposed to be done with the work.
Only the city had high-speed internet that it could offer.
Okay, Bill, you want to go ahead and maybe just start reading some of the bullets and I'll work on pulling this up.
Okay.
Is it still recording, Andy?
Yeah, we're recording.
Okay.
Mhm.
So the general fund, Andy, wait, here we go. So the first slide really is just kind of the overall general fund summary. The general fund now has 6 departments in it, and we'll go into the details of each of those departments, but finance and administration, which was formerly general government. General government used to kind of be a catch-all for everything else city did besides its kind of core services like library and public safety and parks and recreation. So finance and administration, public safety, boards and commissions is a new department this year that we pulled out of general government to be a bit more specific about accounting for a number of different things. Including kind of moving forward things like goal setting, consulting expenses, setting up expenses for reimbursement for counselor and mayor travel and things like that. We'll get into the details of it. Library, parks and recreation, and community development. So 6 departments now, basically, that we're separately accounting for. And the general fund as a whole, we are projecting just short of $7 million in terms of revenue for the general fund. 6.93 to be exact. That's all unrestricted revenue as well as the various restricted revenue streams that come in, but are earmarked and can only be spent by the departments that very specifically get that earmarked revenue. That's a pretty sizable increase over the last biennium, and the big thing in there is the modeling, the estimate of the public safety local option levy revenue that would come in and would directly go into the public safety department as a restricted revenue for that department, and that's at about 1.37 million over a 2-year period. And as we've kind of discussed, and as we talked about with the planning of the levy and stabilizing the general fund by creating more stable funding for public safety, that revenue, that earmarked reserve public safety levy revenue creates a situation where the pie chart, as Andy talked about a little while ago, changes because we don't have public safety at and getting above 50% of general fund unrestricted revenues. We have it contained in this budget at 34%. And that would 33 to 34% would be our permanent target, with public safety levy approved. And keeping it there, boxing it in. Expenditures overall for the general fund are budgeted at 6.94 million. We have inflation coming in, trying to budget for accommodating some inflation at around 4 to 5% for different things, but we're dealing with cost categories that have been seeing 6, 7, 8%. But we are budgeting in some kind of inflation of at least 4% for most things. That's kind of the going assumption. So we're accounting for some inflation going on, but we are being conservative about it and kind of letting costs slip on us a little bit on some things. But we have to make ends meet and try to be as balanced as possible. And then, of course, the increase in the amount of overall expenditure on public safety that's enabled by the levy to bring service levels up to 24/7 coverage, beginning in the first year, fiscal year 2024. And that brings us in at very nearly exact balance between revenues and expenditures. Expenditures are 9,000 in this budget for the general fund, a little over $9,000 more. Operating expenditures are a little over $9,000 more than expected revenues. Now, having said that, the property tax revenue estimates, for purposes of being conservative and making sure we make that 24/7 coverage happen, given the costs that we have been we're aware of with the sheriff's office. We've assumed that we're probably a 90% property tax revenue collection versus what will be likely. We've kind of brought that down a little bit just to be on the safe side. So in reality, the property tax revenue estimate for the general fund, unrestricted, as well as for the public safety levy, are probably 5 to 6% below excessively conservative, just to make sure we have the money for that 24/7 coverage that the voters are assumed to approve and we're budgeting for. As we do every year with every budget, we budget in enough ending fund balance to make sure we have cash moving forward from July 1 all the way through into November, when property tax receipts do come in and are received. So that's a guaranteed cash cushion. We have reserves, but we always have that guaranteed $600,000 earmarked ending fund balance reserved for that purpose, just to be safe. And then we also always have a $200,000 contingency budget and $100,000 annually. Rarely does it get spent anywhere near that, but we do budget for it. And so that's the overall general fund summary for the next biennium. Okay, the new pie chart. This pie chart is the different general fund departments and the budgeting that was done for each of them. Again, assuming that the public safety levy is approved by voters. We started off by saying public safety will no longer get any more than 33 to 34% of unrestricted revenues that come in, franchise fees, the permanent levy rate, and then the various other revenues that come in that aren't earmarked. So they're set at no more than 34% of the pie of unrestricted revenues. Then we went and took a look at the other departments. As we mentioned on March 6th, and Andy briefly spoke about earlier, the county is in a budget cutting crisis is probably too strong a word, but they're very much in a situation of having to do some significant budget cuts. Luckily, the Washington County Cooperative Library System has set that they will increase what are called Pool 1 revenues to affiliate libraries by 1% over last year. They're not freezing them at 0 increase, and they don't intend to cut allocations to libraries in Pool 1. But it's only going to be a 1% increase over last year in fiscal year 24. And given that inflation is what it is, it's technically a loss, but at least it's a 1% increase over last year. So as a result of the county slipping, basically, in terms of revenues from them that we partner with them on, library was nudged up from 28% to 30% of unrestricted revenues basically to cover that. Then the other departments that we wanted to see resources put towards Parks and Recreation, we started with. They now represent 14% of unrestricted revenues. Without the levy last biennium, they were 1% of unrestricted revenues. So that was the single biggest change in terms of the levy, a levy passage enabling resources for a department that had not been getting resources. The second one is community development. It has been budgeted to receive 7% of unrestricted revenues, and that is up from 1% in the previous biennium as well. Parks and Recreation and community development in the current biennium were budgeted to only receive 1% of unrestricted revenues. And we're bumping those up because of the public safety levy changing how we can budget unrestricted revenues for the general fund. We have perhaps a question or a comment.
Yeah, I put it into the chat. I was looking because I have it pulled up over here on my other screen. I was just curious how, and you may have covered it, so I'm sorry if I'm wasting everyone's time. How did we increase the percentage of Parks and Recs from 1 to 14%, but on the general fund summary, the dollar amounts that is allocated towards Parks and Recs decreases?
Chris, good question. Primarily because we pulled Jesse Mays out of Parks and Recreation and made it an enterprise fund.
Got it. Okay,
That's why.
that makes sense.
Yeah, Parks and Rec has always been, Jesse Mays' operations and his revenues have always gone into Parks and Rec.
So that just moved over to general expenses.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, that was it.
No problem. Good question. Thank you. Okay, so the other kind of change to mention with the pie chart here, and I'm taking a lot of time, but this is kind of a big key thing, a big key consequence, a result of levy passage. The boards and commission department is set up to account for all of the different functions, expenses and issues related to the function of city council and all the boards and commissions, trainings, travel, conferences, all of those different things. That after we kind of pulled out what it all amounts to was about 15% of unrestricted revenues. You might recall that the general government department, before we modified it in this current biennium, the general fund gave general government nearly 27% of unrestricted revenues. So if you pull that apart and you just look at expenses related to boards and commissions, that's about 15%. And so that's the red pie slice, is the boards and commissions department. Finance and administration, what used to be the rest of general government, will no longer be getting an allocation, just a sheer allocation of unrestricted revenues as part of slices of the pie. Instead, that department is now going to be, strictly speaking, the finance department handling all the money, and then various kind of administration and overhead functions that that core staff does for all of the other departments and funds, taking care of insurance, taking care of auditing and reporting and all of those different things. And so it is going to be funded by a fair share allocation of those costs paid by the different departments and funds for basically those services. So, but finance and administration will no longer get just kind of a slice of the pie. Rather, we wanted to try our best to allocate the costs of all of that to the different funds and kind of change and account for how we were doing that. So it's a bit more of a concentrated department, and it is funded differently, but it doesn't rely on general unrestricted revenues anymore.
So that might be confusing. Now treated as an internal service fund for the whole city. So for instance, water department and street departments create a lot of AP or a lot of invoicing and things like that. So they're going to be paying the finance and administration department for a lot of that overhead. So it's kind of just an internal, we treat it as an internal service fund. It's kind of would really be kind of at the center of all of this, and it feeds all of these other departments. Kind of like a spoke. Yeah, we are the middle, the hub of this. Yeah.
Yeah, but what comes with that though is that looking back to the fiscal year 21 budget, and certainly for 21-23, the current biennium, this is sort of the last step in both expenditure control budgeting as well as pulling non-water, non-street FTEs out of those funds and properly showing and allocating where those costs are. When we started this process, the water fund was really loaded with FTEs that did nothing for the water department. And now with having a finance and administration department, and then having the different funds and departments kind of pay for those services like an internal service fund for the department operating that way. When we walk through streets fund and water fund and Jesse Mays and all those things, those funds and functions, they no longer have overhead FTEs in them. So we're trying to be as transparent as possible to show where these costs are actually being incurred, but properly paying for them without things hiding. Sherry, you had a question? It is part, we do, and it's different departments use it differently, but we're actually moving over to have all departments and staff keep track of that with the system within our accounting software. That'll be starting July 1. But every department, every individual kind of keeps track of their time more with Excel and attributes to what different functions or what different departments they've been doing work for. So we keep track of it, but we're going to put it into a more consolidated data entry portal for them for timesheets.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, numbers are small, so, but
Well, I'm afraid to expand this, but I'll give it a shot.
Here we go, a full screen view, so maybe things kind of appear. Okay, so yeah, I talked a lot about kind of the pie slices, unrestricted revenues for the general fund, and how we can budget for things differently and plan to there. So finance and administration, kind of walk through what it does and how it's going to be funded, but its revenues primarily, it no longer gets a share of unrestricted revenues from the general fund. So we zero that out. The department is funded now, for the most part, overwhelmingly by transfers in from the other departments. So we have transfers in here and here. So payments from different departments, kind of on a fair share basis, kind of based on how much expenditure and AP and payroll that each of the departments or funds, like the street fund, water fund, incur. And so those payments are made into the finance and administration department. And then here is kind of the summary of the expenditures for the department. So as you can see, we have basically a number of different people in the department, but dedicated 2.1 FTEs working all the time on that. So that's the personnel expense, and we have a little bit of capital equipment expenditure. No, sorry, we don't. I probably should look on it on my screen, but the main point here is that the department no longer is getting that pie slice, but we're operating, as Andy said, the department like an internal service fund. So Cornelius calls this a fund, an internal service fund. But we're small enough that we can just kind of operate it that way, but keep it as a department. Okay, public safety. So I guess the bar in the chart, the chart really is meant to give an idea of the cost transition that we're looking at beginning in 2024. The total amount of resources and the ability we have to pay for 24/7 law enforcement coverage in the city. In 2024, this number right here, if you combine the local option levy and the revenue that should come in conservatively with the 34% capped percentage of unrestricted revenue from the general fund, This is the number that you get. There's some fees and fine revenue. It's not much, but it's also included. But in fiscal year 24, this is the amount of revenue that's expected to come in from all those sources. And that figure is enough to pay for the first tier of 24/7 coverage that the sheriff's office worked with us on in terms of different overnight, 7 days a week coverage. This number this year represents doubling the patrol FTEs from 1.75 to 3.5. Starting in fiscal year 2025, as growth continues and property tax revenues grow, we actually can move up to the second tier of 24/7 coverage, where we have, I believe it's another half FTE equivalent to just pay for a lot more shift differential, more person time in terms of patrol, but resources as well for better coverage over time and shift differential. And that substantively increases for the next couple of years. So by 2026, 2027, we're looking at either being the second or third tier of 24/7 police patrol coverage. And it really kind of boils down to how many FTEs and how much shift differential and overtime the revenues that come in can pay for. But we have some kind of options about how we approach that based on how the sheriff's office work with us on what those kind of service levels might look like to still achieve 24/7 coverage. It's just kind of some variation in it. Here's a detailed kind of budget summary for public safety. Here are $1.3 million over the biennium coming in, property tax revenues from the public safety levy over the 2-year period. As you can see, 34% of unrestricted revenues, a cap of 34% over the biennium. That brings in that just under $1 million. So total resources brought in over the 2-year period for public safety. And then we do have some FTEs related to emergency management. The city manager, public works director, and library director primarily have kind of some time in developing emergency management plan and plan execution that continues to go on. So the FTEs you see are not public safety law enforcement. It really has to do with emergency management process and time. And so at the end of the biennium, we do expect that the department, between costs and expenditures, costs and revenues, to have a slight bit of a reserve built up. We'll see how that plays out, but that's what budgeting conservatively on the revenue side anyway is where that allows that. Boards and commissions. The new department this year, we plan to bring in or have the general fund kind of provide the department about a $5,000, at least the plan is right now, to give the department kind of a $5,000 allocation, not unlike we did for the other departments when we started expenditure control budgeting. The department for trainings and other things will also get a $25,000 ARPA allocation. And that's based on the priorities that you all had adopted in December for the ARPA fund, match up with kind of very specific activities that you all and different boards, other boards and commissions will be doing during the biennium. So that revenue will come in for that function as well. On the cost side, the FTE time, which doesn't show much at all, that's really just the 0.9 FTEs. That's kind of different senior staff and administration that works with you day to day, week to week on different things. There's some public works time in terms of setup and making sure Jesse Bays and everything is ready to go, put up and taken down. And then Lori, who does so much with boards and commissions and you all, she actually quite a bit of her FTE time is allocated to this department rather than administration or finance and administration. So she's probably at least half of that FTE allocation here in the department. The one thing that should be mentioned is we have budgeted for the mayor to get a $500 per month stipend, just to kind of pay for her time to do more meetings, more conferences and that sort of thing as growth and growth planning, and she is increasingly active in a number of those things.
I would just use a gender neutral term there, because it's supposed to be for any mayor going forward. This is really just mirroring what other cities do. As we get more busy, I know the mayor dedicates a lot of time and effort and travel to things. And to be on the record, this is not something the current mayor asked for. This is something we wanted to do as we looked at other ways to kind of properly allocate time and resources within the city. The mayor is one that spends a lot of time and resources and expenses and development or compensation. And it's a good way to recruit maybe future people to do public service too.
I totally agree with that. Talking to people about the mayor and how she has to drive everywhere. We don't all her sick time at work, and then a bit of her around vacation time. It's just wrong. So we have to have something to help balance it out. I don't fully balance it out, but at least it's something.
Thank you. Next, I guess, next department is library. Our library director, Robin Doty, is on here. So I can let her, if she would like to kind of chat a little bit about this. Otherwise, I'll just kind of stick to really boring numbers. So Robin, if you wanted to say anything, go right ahead.
I'm okay with your summary, but I'm happy to address any questions anyone has.
I would just say, you know, kind of summarizing what we said earlier, we don't expect, as far as on the revenue side, we're pretty certain there won't be, at least in fiscal year 24, a second or a pool 2. A number of, a few years ago, there used to be a pool 1 and pool 2 allotment of revenue from Whipples from the library system from the county. We're not expecting that in fiscal year 24, and we're not actually budgeting for that in fiscal year 25. So we're being conservative about that. We are looking, again, we're looking at our pool 1 from the library system coming in from the county being 1% higher in fiscal year 24 than the current fiscal year. But we have budgeted for that to go up to a 3% increase in fiscal year 25 over 24. That might be optimistic. We don't know. The county's still kind of working through its budgeting process. But we figured 3% was neither aggressive nor too conservative. So we went with that. Otherwise, I think the other thing to say is that we've nudged up the library share of unrestricted revenue. We kind of mentioned it earlier, but we've nudged it up from 28% to 30%, kind of in the face of that kind of funding issue with the county. FTEs are held constant at 5.9 overall. Robin's been working hard to make sure that Saturdays have been a challenge, and I'll let her talk about that. But she's holding steady with overall planned number of FTEs, and it's just a matter of meeting demand and services for growing population in the city.
Was the library the only department that had a carry forward balance?
That's a good question. Let me double check that. I don't think so.
Well,
What was the question?
as one of the general fund departments, it may have been.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, it's one of the general fund department, parks, community development, the other ones, the library probably is the only general fund department sub-fund that did. Robin, the question was the library the only fund or department to carry over savings from the year? And I think the answer is probably yes.
There is one other one, general government actually, but because we've pulled out
Yeah,
the part and changed it.
Yeah,
we don't have apples to apples comparison. Any questions for Robin about any of those things? We'll move on to Parks and Rec. Very good. Okay, so the biggest change for Parks and Rec, honestly, is that we increased a budgeted amount of unrestricted revenue going into the department, but at the same time, we pulled Jesse Mays out. So Jesse Mays rental revenue is no longer a budgeted item in this department. And kind of event money that may have to do, that may very specifically have to do with, Jesse Mays is no longer going into this fund, but we're also not budgeting in this fund for staff time related to use of Jesse Mays. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but basically what we expect is that with 14% of unrestricted revenues coming in, the department is budgeted or projected to have about $441,000 in revenue over the 2-year period. And we're looking at expenditures or budgeting over the 2-year period at about $421,000. From a staffing standpoint, the city is planning to no longer pay contractors to do mowing and that sort of thing. We brought on Isaiah, who is our now full-time operations tech 1 employee. He started out as a seasonal employee, very impressively did his job. And so he now that he's full-time will be doing a lot more related to Parks and Rec maintenance and that sort of thing. So rather than having a number of different people doing a little bit in Parks and Rec, what you're seeing in the FTEs at 1.2 is greatly kind of a dedicated person who's doing a lot more. And then some others who will be assisting. And then we have some staff time that used to be in here that has to do with Jesse Mays. So overall staffing related to Parks and Recreation globally is higher. But this is just the Parks and Rec slice. And we expect based on revenue and expenditures for the fund to target an ending balance of just over $21,000.
Do we already have capital allocation for the tools we need, such as a trailer and driving the lawnmower and other stuff, or were you like on contractors to decide that?
Great question. We do, and actually, there will be an arrangement between the Streets and Water Fund to help pay for that for Parks and Rec. But we do have the capital equipment for it, and so we'll be able to do it.
And we have a pretty skilled another operations tech member that joined last year who's really good with small engines. So he's been able to repair and help us with maintaining a lot of equipment we do have. Some kind of brought back from the dead that we didn't think were working. So we have a pretty good arsenal now of backup equipment too.
Any other questions about it?
Okay. I guess I'm trying to understand that first line item, the restricted garlic festival line item there, and you have 14,000 plus as a proposed budget line item. In my mind, I know that the North Prince Events Association and the Garlic Festival has paid the city about 14,000, right? And so I'm in my mind, I'm just trying to understand why there's a $14,000 number there for the next couple of years. Like, I don't see the NPA, the Elephant Garlic Festival, projecting that much revenue to pay back the city, to pay to the city. So I'm just trying to understand why that number is there, when I think that's the total number that the NPA has been contracted to, pay to the city.
Thank you, Mayor. Great observation. And that's exactly what it is. It's part of opening fund balance. So that's the reserve of all those monies that have been paid for Garlic Festival to the city accumulated. So that's not budgeted revenue to come in during the biennium, and it's not budgeted expenditure either. It's the reserve that basically represents part of opening balance.
Then if you look further down, then under the revenue stream, you have 4265 as revenue over the next couple of years. Now, that essentially that's the revenue projected based on historical data.
That's correct.
It sounds like we're going to have a discussion between the city and NEPA soon, so I think this will be one of the topics.
Yeah.
But what this represents up top is kind of the running total of those revenues through the years. And then what is expected to be received from the payment from NEPA to the city, that's captured down here under the on the bottom, and then it would just be added to the top of the next budget.
Okay. In past budget sheets, For Parks and Rec, we've had running total down at the bottom for Garlic Festival, now it's at the top. But that's all that is, it is running total. So we're moving things around and sometimes that doesn't help.
Yeah, of course, it was hard to find it when I was going through, I guess I was looking at the bottom line and not the top line, but I just wanted to clarify that.
No, appreciate it, no, it was a very good question, and you just want to be on the same page, that's kind of the running total reserve on that. Guess we can move forward on community development. Okay. So over the next 2 years, we're moving forward with the urban growth boundary expansion. But besides the GOA and the far west property that now has a development application, land use application in for industrial development, there's really not a lot left in terms of kind of new unplanned development coming in and community development kind of from the starting line, working with somebody who wants to do new development. Bryn Hill, that's an ongoing thing, but we're not talking about a lot. We really don't have much time left in the urban growth boundary for new yet to be planned development. So the department, honestly, over the next 2 years, really kind of from a work plan and budget planning perspective, carrying forward and getting UGB expansion to the goal line, working through concept planning for the UGB expansion, and that begins in July. And then really kind of working towards implementing recommendations and actions in the new downtown plan. So those are kind of the emphases for action and budgeting. Let's see. So total revenues coming in, the department has kind of been budgeted an allocation of 7% of unrestricted revenues. So that's just under 200,000 and about 197,000 over the biennium. Other different revenues, the department through Andy's, my, and Steve's efforts, kind of doing urban renewal actions. The urban renewal agency doesn't employ people, but the community development department is the kind of the staff focus of action on urban renewal activities. And then at the end of the year at closeout, we reimburse the community development department for its time and expense carrying out urban renewal agency actions. So that's part of that transfer in from the urban renewal agency we've traditionally done. That's part of revenues for the department. And then various fees that are expected to come in from new development, processing applications, dealing with all that. On the expense side, 1.2 FTEs for the department, primarily Steve. He's I think nearly full 1.0 FTE here. He does do some other things, a little bit of other things in other departments, but he's overwhelmingly in this department. And then just kind of other activity and actions, primarily a bit of my time, a bit of Andy's time with urban renewal activities, and then UGB planning stuff. So overall, the budget has the department ending the biennium right now with a in the red by about just under $17,000. So again, we're being conservative with new development coming in. I don't specifically have numbers on what the GOA developments will bring in for the department on fees, that sort of things. And I don't specifically budget here for how much fee revenue we will be getting from development of the Far West property. So all of that coming in will undoubtedly bring the balance at the end of the biennium, at least in the budget over that, but I don't have numbers on that in here.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
So on page 41, I'm kind of curious about the budgeted line item for the land use permits, residential 1 type 1 and the land use plan type 2 through 4 residential. The initial budgeted amounts seem fairly high, like 520,000, right? And then the proposed budget is significantly lower. So do you recall why we went through that and budgeted that so high? And then also the other one further down, 266 versus, the current is 31K. So what was going on? Can you recall why we budgeted so high, yet the actuals are really kind of coming in a lot lower? The proposed budget is coming in a lot lower as well.
Mayor, I can answer that question. I can't answer that question. So the reason is because in the budget formulas for figuring out permit fee revenue, it was set up so that you take the number of building or new homes or whatever, however many number of residential units you expect to be getting, and it's overwhelmingly Bryn Hill. It has been for the past, couple, one or two budget cycles. But in the calculations, it sort of assumes every single home comes in sort of by itself. So that individual home realizes all these different fees, sort of like it's being built by itself. Well, with Bryn Hill and these master plan developments, the way the model worked was not accurate because these are all homes as part of a master plan development that kind of went through process and fees well before when the time comes for that home to be built. So the budget numbers for permit fees for development, at least in the first year of Bryn Hill or longer, but the tail end of Sunset Ridge and the first year of Bryn Hill were kind of calculating fees to be too high because it didn't kind of factor in that it was a bunch of fees had been in process that happened before we had gotten to that point. So the forecast for revenues coming in for these different land use fees have been corrected to reflect that they will be significantly lower because they're part of this larger master plan development. They aren't brand new from the start of residential development applications.
And is there a projection? Is this, are we projecting X amount of homes being built in year one of the biennium and then two, and that is reflected in that 181K number?
Mayor, yes, that is correct. In January, as part of planning for the levy, we do this every winter or early spring in budget season. We sit down and have a detailed discussion with Lennar about what their build out pace expectation is. And so all of our levy revenues, all of our levy revenue projections, and all of our SDC revenue projections for the capital funds, all of that are based on their detailed discussion of what their build out has been by phase and by product type and what they expect to be happening. And it's extremely useful because mortgage rates going up and inflation being what it is significantly cut into their build out pace. So the revenue drop, the fee calculation has changed to be more accurate, but it's also true that their build out pace, because of mortgage rates being twice as much as they were 2 years ago, that their build out pace is slowed down too. And we're assuming, for at least 18 months, their build out pace is slower than they would like. Okay, other operating funds, 3 of them for this biennium. So the first one, streets fund, I can advance for myself. So as far as the streets fund street funds go, we're expecting really kind of the big thing for the fund has been the transportation utility fee methodology update. And as you know, with adoption of that last spring, July 1, all residential accounts began paying $5 per month in tough revenue, as opposed to $1.23 or what it had been for a number of years. In September of last year, we then implemented the tough methodology for businesses, and that is combined to bring the tough up to about $150,000, a little over $150,000 a year projected. We won't have a full first fiscal year of the new tough for both residential and commercial yet, because we kind of stair-stepped implementation. but it should come in at a little over $150,000 annually, and there is in the methodology an uptick for inflation, basically, each year. But the main thing is that new sustainable revenue source is going to help contribute to the fund's ability to kind of take care of some additional pavement management with the pavement management program that we've put in place. So we'll just be able to kind of more sustainably fund some things, and that has been a huge contributor. The local fuel tax has, of course, we talk about this every month. It's been coming in a little bit lower than projected, of course. And that primarily goes to pay for debt service and the transportation bond, and we'll talk more about that later. But the TUF being updated and bringing in sufficient revenues does give us peace of mind about, debt service with until the tax kind of picks up the projection, the meet projections better. Otherwise, we expect the fund to kind of end the biennium with a little over $1 million in reserves, and continuing to carry out the new pavement management program.
Just a comment, I know that the other night when we had Commissioner Willie at our city council meeting, he made a comment about just expecting to see lower, gas tax revenue in the county, the state, and that sort of thing, sort of projecting up there in the future. And in my mind, I'm thinking we should probably be thinking that too. Like, I'm sure that we, could potentially, I see that our state and our county numbers have gone up a little bit, right? And they're projected to go up a little bit. And I'm just wondering, what's the thought process behind that? Because, I mean, if there's some projection about it going actually down or being reduced, and I don't know, I haven't seen numbers, I'm just going by what he mentioned the other night. Is that something that we should be thinking about or consider?
Great questions, Mayor. What I would say is that the revenue that we get from the county and the state, in terms of gas tax money, it's really pretty much a pure per capita allocation. As our population goes up, we just, by having people here, we just get more money. I think perhaps what, and we could, I will bug him in a week. I can ask him this question if you like, when I see him, but I think what he might have been referring to more specifically is the share of gas tax that helps go into the MISTIP program. As a percentage of total, fuel efficiency has killed the gas tax because people are just not buying as much gas, as a percentage. I think perhaps that's what he was talking about, but for us, it's more, it's a per capita formula, and as long as we're growing, our revenues have tended to go up because of that.
And I can appreciate that. But in my mind, I'm also thinking with, that's something maybe, I'm sure it's in the back of your mind, but just to consider.
It is, and it was a consideration when we were doing the fuel tax program a few years ago, and we were talking to now Senator Solman about, so we talked to the state about all these communities that rely on fuel taxes in counties, and but we're also at the same time, encouraging more efficiency, electric cars, incentivizing that. What does that do to local infrastructure? Is there some sort of program at the state level and ODOT to help us think about those things? It's not anywhere on their radar, but I guess two things. This is where the TUF is kind of important. It helps backfill some of that. And also in North Plains specifically, we do still get a lot of freight traffic, which is, they're not, if anything, they're not the most fuel efficient. So that's what will help us a little bit, maybe compared to the average across the county. But I get their fuel figures every month. The last 2 months have actually picked up year on year compared to last year. So I'm thinking, maybe the pandemic screwed up everything, and it may take a while to recover if we ever do, but it may take a while to just get back to people driving a lot more. But
also a space age signage. So they're looking at people snap more, it goes up the Jasper. So just a drone thing.
Yeah, and they're undercutting the competition. It's a really unique dynamic between those two. I'll just say that.
I forgot that with the streets fund and the water fund, we actually have 2 pages of the budget sheets, so I misspoke a little bit. Because their budget sheets are extremely long, because everything's kind of captured in one spreadsheet. So that was revenues on the previous page. So on the expenditure side, you can see that we have 1.3 dedicated FTE working on street fund. Staffing and time needs. Moving forward, we've extracted kind of non streets activity FTE time out of the fund, and we've budgeted properly or kind of properly allocated actual kind of staff time on street fund activities. Kind of the big projects for the fund really are kind of street and sidewalk improvements. The infill project for sidewalks along Commercial Street, as well as some improvements along 313th Avenue, just south of Commercial Street. And so those projects are budgeted about $250,000 each over the biennium. Otherwise, the fund will kind of continue to pay for different maintenance and other items needed. Let's see, anything else of note? Not really. We upped the allocation to the vehicle reserve fund from the streets fund, and it only been putting $1,000 to $2,000 a year, a very small amount for future vehicle and capital needs. So we have the wherewithal to bump that up over the biennium to $10,000 a year. So that's now 20,000 put in vehicle or equipment savings, reserve savings by the fund over the biennium.
Bill, I got a quick question for you.
Sure.
Looking down at the expenditures, you have budgeted, this is just curiosity question, supplies and insurance are the 2 ones that stand out to me. The last 2 budgets, we've not even come close to that amount. And we're budgeting the same 22,000 again, but it looks like we did 23, 22 one year, 42 one year. We're on track to do 52 in this budget. Why the need to budget so high for that? Are we reserving in case we need to actually pay what's the deductible?
Off the top of my head, Chris, I don't have the precise answer for that, so I can check into that question for you and get back to you. But my recollection is that for the last biennium, we did bump that up significantly. I can't recall the specific reason, so we just carried that assumption moving forward with the new biennium. If I couldn't explain a weird discrepancy with my own investigation, I tended to leave the number alone.
Okay.
And so that's what I did here, to be perfectly fine.
Okay, sweet. And it was the same thing on the supplies. It looks like we budgeted pretty high, and we're just not getting anywhere near that. So I know the old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it, and you got to keep it in the budget. So
yeah, on the not here anymore with expenditure control budgeting. Whatever they save, they get to keep and put towards things in the following budget, kind of fiscal cycle. But on the supplies side, it was kind of, I think what you're seeing there is that it was always intended to get to a point that we're going to do with this biennium, and that is for us to not rely on mowers and other kind of service providers. And so that was kind of the hope, at least with the last budget cycle. But this time around, now that we kind of have that, third full-time person kind of under the public works umbrella being able to do these things, we're sticking with that budget, kind of a little bit higher budget for supplies. And a few others.
Question, and it's in regards to some of the allocations and the contributions in this fund. Principally, I just want to make sure that in the expenditures that I believe we undertook a payment management program. Am I mistaken about that, or we executed that? And is that reflected in some of these improvements that we have listed in the budget in this budget?
Yes, it does. what we've been fortunate to do thus far is take streets that are kind of high up in the pavement management program and first apply for a state grant, small cities allotment, to see if we can get those being successful. And if you're paving, 6 blocks or so, a long stretch of it, even the 250,000 that the state will give you is not enough. So we'll have matching out of the street funds. That's where some of the tough pitches in. We'll have the small cities allotment grant to kind of combine there. And then sometimes an overlay was combined or was part of the transportation bond program too. We can show you later when we get to that fund. There's kind of a matrix of different funding sources there, but the short answer is, yeah, we try to, if we're going to apply for the small cities allotments, we'll look at the pavement management program. That's kind of our top priority, to take those older streets. And especially if we know, okay, within the next 2 to 3 years, there's a water line replaced there, that accelerates it even more. So we can kind of combine those 2 projects into one. But yeah, the pavement management program is definitely feeding the information into these, I guess, maintenance considerations.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that we're allocating for it, because we do have areas that need attention, and they'll need, essentially they'll need some stopgap repair until we can get to the larger planned repair. At least in my estimation, from what I can see with my awareness.
Yeah. But that is a good point there though, because we have zeroed out crack sealing, and maybe we haven't done a crack seal in a while. So maybe this is something we'll repeat. I mean, but the categories in there: street projects, crack sealing, could even be materials. It is stopgap measures, like you're saying. I can think of a few streets, just fixing some potholes. Okay, until we get the pavement management program in 2 years, it's enough to get us by until then.
Look at payments, maybe thought into inspecting the sidewalks for lifts and cracks and such. I know we don't have too many sidewalks, but
Well, that is that's a tricky one. I might wait till we get a public works director here to take that one. That way his email address and phone number can be on those letters, because it's that one's about as fun as getting tagging. What's that? Fences. Yeah. Ask City of Hillsborough when they did an inventory downtown, and they marked and tagged all these sidewalks and sent people letters, and it wasn't pretty. The ones that the city has to maintain, yes, we will tag those and try to repair those. That's a tricky one, and it probably takes a bigger conversation about, if something's definitely a hazard. And actually, I scraped on my hand over the weekend running, tripped on a sidewalk in another city. So they're out there, but it probably takes a bigger conversation about how you tackle these and how you fund them. A lot of our sidewalks are newer, so we're fortunate there. But yeah, there's some in the older parts of town that would take some fixing, and it's just how do we work with homeowners to fix those. I mean, there are some programs out there, and I think that's something we should consider for another day. Things that Hillsborough and other cities are looking at, having a matching grant program. Homeowners responsible. It can be $5,000 to fix a couple sidewalk panels, though. So does the city do a matching program?
Well, I think, and you're right, and I also think as part of the informational educational campaign in whether it's our City 101 or infographics, I think people, need to understand what's their responsibility. In a lot of cases, most people don't think about that. They don't, some cases don't know that. So that's something we should be proactive doing, is informing people where those responsibilities begin.
Absolutely. And we specifically, that was one of our first one-on-ones we ever did. It was kind of the genesis of the topic. I told Corinne, we need, this is just let people know like what you're getting into in the right of way and sidewalks is definitely one of those. As a matter of fact, she just emailed me on that yesterday regarding a Facebook comment. I said, yeah, we can send out the reminder about this. So a good question, might be a good future work session topic about that.
So Beaverton, as well as our public works discussions, backwards. The city of Beaverton, my friend was there, and the city does that. We charge a fee for it. I know I did a backward testing myself just to know about it. So I took the courses there. At least I passed, maybe. But that is pretty simple. It doesn't take too much time. Just to test it, to repair it, maybe it's a different way. But to actually test it is pretty simple. Every year, is that something that's worth having an extra person to do? Because at $50 per se per house, you could do them in probably 50 minutes.
Yes,
That's pretty quick, and maybe it's something we should do internally.
I agree. It's on my list of things that I want someone new to come in and kind of take over as a topic. That is one of those. Especially Javier has stepped up and done kind of our backflow, been our back some ideas about how to do this differently going forward, and that's one of them.
For house,
Yeah.
Good segue for the water fund.
Okay. Water.
Okay, water fund exhibit 1 or 2, just to remind myself. So with the water rate study, kind of coming to conclusion, kind of right before, during budget season kind of kicking in, we've kind of matched up what that study's findings were and assumptions were regarding budgeting for the water fund for the biennium. So where the water fund subsidy has been ended, there's no longer just kind of a major $500,000 or so dollars being just kind of put over into the general fund to help operations. That's with the public safety levy that is enabled to end, and you'll see kind of the beginning of buildup of reserves faster as a result of that on the next page. But we're assuming that water customer fees paid in are going to go up by 4% in the first year of the new biennium, and then by 5% in fiscal year 25. So kind of a stair-step growth as growth occurs in the city. Kind of based consistent with Joint Water Commission communication resolution with us about expected wholesale rates. We're expecting to pay 11% more for water in the next budgeted biennium than we had to pay in the current biennium. So we are looking at water costs going up measurably. That's what we're running with. It's possible. There's a lot of discussion about the cost of the Willamette water supply going up and whether or not that will affect rates in the future. We don't know. There's discussion about it. So we would just note that this is what we're budgeting in terms of wholesale water rates. And you'll be the first to know, certainly if there are kind of any major changes in how Joint Water Commission is thinking about wholesale rates moving forward with the Willamette water supply costs going up. But overall, we should be starting the biennium July 1 with nearly 3.5 million in reserves in the water fund. And we're looking at revenues coming in at just over 4.3 million, again, mostly from water fees paid by customers. We are assuming that water rates are going to be kind of frozen for a year, and then probably modest increases over the next 2 years after that. So at least for 1 year, we're not looking at changing water rates as a result of the water rate study that we did. It is, what we will note is that in this biennium, we will be revisiting water rates and water fund operations and planning as we get closer to understanding what the UGB expansion is really going to look like in the infrastructure finance planning that we're going to have to do. So we're going to run with this current water rate study, showing no need to do much about water rate increases in the short term. So we're modest with it, but we'll return to the issue with an update with infrastructure planning and see where that goes. But we're trying with this fund to set things up as best we can in being ready to finance new water infrastructure as it's needed.
I have a question then on line 444,000 under revenues. 3.587 million in water usage fees. Does that take into account any increases for water in the second year or 2025? Or is this seeing no increases as if it was proposed at that level? That number, is it static?
Councilor Sheldon, great question. Fiscal year 24, the first year assumes no change to water rates. So growth is just number of water customers paying. Fiscal year 25 assumes it's either 2.5% or 3% increase.
1.5.
Was it 1.5?
And that's fine.
Year two.
If we're going to, I'm okay with accounting for that revenue. That has to be council action. You're making a presumption in this budget or a pro forma that action is going to occur. And we don't know if that's going to occur or not occur. Correct?
Correct. That would not be collected until that is approved by council.
For the record, the water study is year 1 flat, year 2 1% increase, year 3 I think it's 1.5 or 2% increase. But no, I'm trying to project out the 5 or 7 years. None of them ever go above 2%. I think, but anyway, we'll have more on that in May the next meeting.
Yeah, I'm not insinuating I'm opposed to that, but I am a guardian of that. While I'm in this position on this council, I just want to make sure that we have a equity lens in the newcomers, which would be our businesses that are going to be coming. We want to charge them a fair rate, but they're going to pay, and the burden shouldn't be shifted to our residents. And there's a fair amount of legacy people in this community that are sensitive to those rates for a variety of reasons. And I think we have to be mindful of that.
Thank you. I guess we can move on to the second water fund page. In terms of other major expenses for the water fund, we're budgeting kind of just ongoing debt service for the water tank project. Different capital projects, just kind of ongoing pipe upgrades and replacements, kind of status quo moving forward. We very specifically are budgeting for the water fund to help pay for some pipe replacement and upgrades, kind of right around here, kind of related to some of the improvements that are being planned. I think that's one of the big ones projects, Andy.
We'll get to them later.
Okay, but that would be the water fund's contribution to that particular project that's been identified. Let's see, otherwise, I think we're budgeting $200,000 for contingency over the 2-year period. And we're looking at the funds balanced reserves increasing over the biennium by a little over $1 million by June 30th, 2025, with kind of the numbers that we've programmed in. FTEs are pretty close to what they were. We did, kind of by extracting, that was still being kind of having to allocate it to water fund, kind of more handling management and finances. Those were pulled out and put into the finance and administration department at that time. So the water fund is really kind of down to 3.1 FTEs for employees who are kind of really day-to-day doing the water fund, water system, activities, management and work.
And again, the insurance, $75,000 is not as much as the national cost. That's, just because the line item covered with.
Basically, that's correct.
Do those, actually money that's being budgeted for insurance, can that be used for something else?
Potentially, I mean, yeah, if we want to identify lower costs being put into that, we could certainly budget for it to go elsewhere.
I was wondering about the extra fund to pull from the else budget out, since we why maybe never seen anything else of insurance. I was wondering why there would be most of the budgeting is line item we did last year's highway. They just copy over the last one, especially this number.
Yes, yeah. Basically, it's just kind of carried over, double to be a two-year total. But yeah, I mean, if we kind of we try to match it up with expected expenditures. If we came in lower, if we expect to come in lower for the biennium on expenditures by line item, we consider that success, saving money, but we come back to begin the budget for the new biennium kind of with the old beginning numbers again, when appropriate.
Bill, a quick clarifying question. The loan proceeds, those are all related to the water tank project, which is now just converted over to the debt service.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the project is done in terms of work really, so now it's just a debt service issue.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Jesse Maines. Oops. Okay. All right, so the new enterprise fund, Jesse Maines fund. So kind of we kind of talked a bit before about kind of actually last year about wanting to kind of review Jesse Maines operations, take a look at how our fees and usage patterns and management process kind of compared to best practices, what other cities' facilities, how those other cities are kind of managing their facilities. And so we set up this fund, put some seed money into it, gave it an ARPA allocation, and then kind of figured out, how much staff time kind of goes into or should go into kind of better reservation time, dealing with deposits, kind of any setup that's needed, checking people in, checking people out, that sort of thing. But we did kind of go through a study process. We looked at 5 other facilities and other communities that were, there's nothing quite like Jesse Maines, but each of those cities' facilities are kind of unique in their own way. But we tried to take a look and just kind of see facilities out there that are kind of, how are they being managed? What's their fee structure like? And some of the big things that we kind of identified were that Jesse Maines fees were kind of an hourly or a time basis 3 to 4 times below what most other communities are charging. Hillsborough, a facility of theirs was looked at, they charge 4 times as much for one of their older, I think it's their senior center building. So we didn't look at this as let's be like them or we can budget based on how they do things. They're Hillsborough. We wouldn't do that, but it was useful to look and see that Banks and Newburgh and a few other communities with some kind of older facilities that they continue to keep up for private rentals are charging up to 3 times kind of as more, 3 times more than we are, kind of on an hourly or a 2-hour basis or whatever time period. And then we also kind of looked at how are staff how does the reservation system work? How are staff being budgeted to be involved in rentals? And, most cities kind of have dedicated somebody that checks a party into the facility at the beginning of the rental and then formally shows up and kind of goes through a little bit of a time intensive, but a procedure to check the renter out of the facility. Hillsborough pays a staff person to stay at the event the whole time. I mean, Hillsborough likes to apparently spend a lot of money. We can't, and we're not going to do that, but we have budgeted in this fund a little bit of staff time to kind of be a little more formal about check in and check out, that sort of thing. So the fund assumes, at least for operations, we assume that over the biennium, other cities, non-Hillsborough cities for comparable facilities are charging about 3 times as much as we are. So we've assumed that over a 2-year period, fees can be increased, at least for Jesse Mays, by 100%. So up 1 tier, at least kind of begin to approach what some other facilities charge. We do expect with the park improvements here that we're already seeing far more interest for birthday parties and anniversary parties and that sort of thing. Bailey was actually very busy today with a few queries. And I think just the playground and the plaza, everything kind of being near completion is getting people's attention, as well as the kind of the pickleball court being available soon. So we're already seeing an uptick in interest. We do fully expect to see that rental volume of Jesse Mays will increase. So we're kind of combining that with assuming that we're transitioning fees up a bit over time. And so this is kind of the fund that gets created to kind of compare, potential revenues versus expenditures related to kind of managing operations here. And this is at least the first step at a budget for that, to kind of isolate and see how we're doing in terms of operating. Any questions about that? I guess I would say. Council.
Yeah, I say be careful what you wish for. Honestly, I mean, I understand where you're headed. Okay, at least I think I could support going here for a couple of years. I honestly, I think as far as where the revenue's at, I think the cost are going to be, more exorbitant than what you think they'll be. I'm not sure the net gain, perhaps looking at additional revenue, we think about, okay, well, we have a facility, but there's a lot of burden too. And I'm not sure that we're going to realistically capture all that. So for the benefit of the community, yes. For somebody outside of the community, I know it's not easy to control that, but there's liability considerations. There's upkeep, maintenance, wear and tear. I'm not sure we're accounting for all that here, and I'm not being negative. I just think it's something we have to watch for. I'm sometimes, I think there's all of that potential, and then I think about what comes with that potential, and it's in some cases buying us more headaches than maybe worth.
Yeah, that's definitely a consideration, the extra management of it. However, it's also the utility of assets and everything in place. And trying to get more utility is obviously what the try it is. So yeah, actually in that way. But there's going to be more, right? But that's with utility as going to be we should explore new ways of actually using this.
Thank you, Councilor. Yeah, I don't know that we are trying to budget or envision that Jesse Mays be something that we kind of like actively advertise or kind of try to make a profit center per se. But given that we're definitely getting attention for all the great improvements outside, and we are already kind of seeing increase in queries for availability of the building. It's kind of a twofold. Can we better capture some revenue for what we know is going to be kind of more usage, and see what we can do about that. And then it was instructive to kind of go through and try to figure out what Jesse Mays alone may or should incorporate or kind of be in terms of a budget and a facility, because pulling it out of Parks and Rec kind of helped explain why has that department been a challenge? From a revenue and a cost standpoint, well, because, Jesse Mays is a community asset, doesn't charge much. But it does get used and it does kind of have staff time involved with it. So kind of extracting and separating those two, was helpful in that regard too.
So I have a question on, this is, could fall under this topic or this fund item or whatnot, but, I guess even in the bigger scope of things, when I think about all the maintenance and things like that, that we have to think about and address and pay for, but, how are we addressing the building maintenance, for city properties? And by pulling this out of the parks, right? To me, it seems like you pulled it out just so that we could capture maybe some revenue data, right? But then it also costs money to turn the lights on, maintain the building, floor, ceiling, and the whole enchilada, right? And then I take it further, and then I think about and I know that we've talked about this over the years, just about all the buildings, all the city facilities, it's just like, how is our budget addressing the maintenance plan for our city facilities, especially this building? And are we saving for it? Are we putting something aside to make sure that we have, a line item, if the water main breaks or something in this case?
Mayor, the short answer is we have not been. And honestly, I think the first step, or at least the attempt at that, was kind of putting it into its own fund so we can isolate that. All utility, this is a separate utility account. This has had separate maintenance cost issues or items over time. So all of those line items where Jesse Mays specific expenditures on different costs have been extracted and now put in, that historical data has been put into for future looking planning purposes. That's all reflected, but it's not, we don't have our head wrapped around very specifically the way we've been keeping track of expenditures and not putting money into reserves. I guess the best way to put it is that this is kind of like our first step in trying to do it more accurately. What I don't want to do is present the idea that the goal is to make Jesse Mays a profit center per se. It's just until we isolated this and try to kind of operate it in a fund on its own, we really have no true idea. And how, can we answer the question, how well are we taking care of this facility? But kind of based on the data that we don't have a great idea. And this kind of helps get us to begin to think about that.
Sorry,
Okay, I'm not gonna jump on here. I'm not gonna get I'm not gonna get into the weeds because it might not be budget related, but it might be. I have a call at council and now we have a public works director. I'm gonna say it again. This city needs to make it a priority to have a facilities maintenance plan. That has to be on his plate. We're gonna build a $5 million facility. We can't already take care of what we have. In my mind, we're not doing a good enough job at that. And that is something that I see that we should be moving toward. So in the budget, yeah, I think this will help capture specifically this building. I think the revenue is hugely overstated, and I'm not saying it can't be a profit center or should be, but in the budget, okay, let's carve it out and track it. And if we can put the realistic cost in there and see what it comes out in actuals, that does give us more and more feedback. But part of the overall plan, which is kind of where the mayor was going, is we have to take care of our facilities. Why are we building anything if we can't take care of what we have? And I think we failed in the past in that regard. Not that we have a lot of dilapidated property, but we certainly have things that need more care and more control going forward.
And I think, you know, this center in my mind is, I mean, this is our gem and this is what we use, and not just for city council and other city related meetings, but the historical society, the garlic festival, the, I mean, the chili cook-off. I mean, this is where it happens, and all those city events are not a money generator for the city, and we get that. But if there's a way, you know, this will be an interesting, I think, exercise in trying to collect additional data on how we move forward.
I guess I'll just jump in and say, I hear both your points well taken. The library is an extremely well maintained facility. They do a good job of outlining those costs and everything. It's also 14 years old. City Hall is 80 years old. This is probably one of the oldest buildings in the city. So those two alone, it's difficult to keep up with those. I guarantee you, I promise, with the new public works facility, we will have a really nice maintenance plan there. Starting from scratch, have someone new on board, that would be a top priority. This one and City Hall, sometimes we're just in triage mode, just because of the state of those buildings. But I hear you, point well taken. And yes, it takes resources to maintain this, and this is hopefully the start. I'd love to see in the future this contingency line that has nothing in it, you know, maybe someday we'll have something in there that'll fix a boiler or whatever we need there.
And this is not a, you know, fighting stretch of the United Nations. It's not a complaint or you know, whatever, just.
Yeah, priority. I hear you. We're in agreement there. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think one thing to keep in mind too is when you're looking at the expenditures, that 52,000 in salaries, employee benefits, payroll. I mean, that is the time commitment. It's not like the city's going out and hiring a 0.3 FTE of someone to just stand guard at Jesse Mays. It's taking existing employees and making sure that there is that time and resources and dedication to keeping that facility up. So I know we only see 17,000 or, you know, 4,100 in repairs, but you've budgeted 52,000 in sweat equity to make sure that that place stays up. And so I think that also needs to be taken into account.
We move to the next. Oh, okay. Says to me, it's right when I put a lifesaver in, I didn't plan that one. Okay, sorry everyone. Okay, we're on the capital funds. So I'll kind of go through these. I'm just pulling out some of the projects and some of the items of interest, starting with the transportation SDC fund. And I just put one in. I don't really need that. This fund, in addition to the fuel tax, will also contribute $600,000 to the transportation bond debt service over the years. There's some few projects identified that the transportation SCCs will qualify to help pay for, so they'll be transferred into that bond fund. There's a slice that contributes to the public works building fund. All of our capital funds will do that operate out of the forthcoming public works building. Let's see, Bryn Hill contributions with SDCs is projected at roughly 650,000 over the next 2 years. And let's see here what Bill said at the bottom, the net, the one-time contribution to the public works, that's the net reduction in reserves of the biennium. Okay, yeah, so contributing some of the SDCs to the public works building will eat into some of the reserves there, though. So starting with 1.4 and with the transportation projects, public works building gets us to an ending fund balance of about 575,000 over the biennium. And the projects I'll get into a little bit later on what those would go towards for 600,000. Okay, I'll just kind of go. Street fee and lieu fund, that's another capital fund that we have where projects and development, if they don't do, typically if they don't do a street improvement that they're required to do, maybe building a sidewalk that it's at the end of the street that has no other sidewalk, so it's a sidewalk to nowhere. They pay into a basically it's a capital and maintenance fund as a fee in lieu of doing that. Then we take those revenues and put them towards other projects that are within that area. So for instance, Taco Bell, the Taco Bell project in Roll Tide to pay a fee in lieu on some portion of the project, a future intersection upgrade. So that upgrade is not happening now, but it could with the Glencoe Opportunity Area project, for instance. And these are fee in lieu funds that can contribute to that. So they just have to have a nexus to future spending. But we don't have a lot budgeted outlay for this. Pacific Street sidewalk is what we're thinking over the next 2 years. Moving to transportation bond. This is where a lot of projects reside. And if you recall, it was originally a $6.6 million borrowing, full faith and credit borrowing, resulting from the fuel tax. So we have some of those loan proceeds, we have interest, and we have some other funds like the TDT funds that are able to transfer in for some of the projects. All add up to this list here that you see that we walks. That's a project later this year. Main Street pedestrian improvements, that's sidewalks south of Commercial to Pacific Street. Pacific Street sidewalks between Glencoe and Main Street. 311th Avenue pedestrian and railroad crossings, that's basically leading folks from downtown Commercial Street to Jesse Mays. Sidewalks there, sidewalks around the perimeter of Jesse Mays, and then sidewalks on 309 out here that lead up to North Avenue. All of this, as you can see, is kind of creating a grid, getting people between downtown and North Avenue to this park. So it's providing people with sidewalks there. 313th Avenue, that is that's going to be an overlay project and sidewalks there, and partially that will be a water project too. I'll touch on that later. 311th Avenue sidewalks, that is south of Commercial Street, and all of these are projected to happen in year 2, so I don't have all the exact designs for those. And then an overlay for East Hillcrest. That's one from the pavement management program. So all told, projects about $5.9 million worth, and with our principal and interest from the bond, 776,000 over the biennium, leading to 6.7 million in expenditures. That leaves the fund balance right at about empty. And with that full faith and credit borrowing, one of the stipulations was they wanted, I think it was 80% of spending to be done in the first 3 years of borrowing. That's what we're attempting to do there. So basically all of that money out the door and getting projects out there. So that is a lot happening in the transportation bond fund. Our next public works director is going to be very busy keeping on top of all these projects, but we do it as a team, and 3J is heavily involved, and we have bi-weekly meetings always going over these projects. So any questions with this fund?
Being moved on.
Yeah.
When I walk up limits, it's the sidewalk and space, sidewalk, there are sidewalks on either side of spaces. Would it be try to, like, with our ongoing work we have, maybe fill in some of those broken teeth? When they're making more green light, maybe work with some guy really doing work. And just really have 170 Actually, I think we have, 240,000 of that, and it's so expensive for that. How many utilities we collected? But they're not reflective of how much we're actually gonna cost from it.
Yeah,
So can you do that while we count the rules of progress?
we can certainly look at that. Commissioner Willie saying some projects are just much higher than originally budgeted for. And some of these, we were planning to do a sidewalk on one side of the street, but now we're doing two. That doesn't necessarily double the cost of the project, but it might take it up by 80%. So we will have a lot of money going out the door for the projects that we do have. Now, that being said, there may be, so we have a bid due tomorrow for the 313th Avenue work. We may get lucky and some of these bids come in under our projections, and we can always just kind of add in, all right, we got a block here, we'd love to do sidewalk. Can you give us an estimate on that too?
Yeah, so we're saying 3 houses in a sidewalk.
Yeah, well, you know, we originally didn't plan to do any extension of sidewalk on 313th. That wasn't part of the plan 2 years ago. But looking at it from the Veterans Park, there's one more block and you connect to Claxter. We thought that just makes sense to connect that, and Claxter has sidewalks along the old way. You know, I remember the days of pushing a stroller. If you can push it 6 blocks on a sidewalk, that's pretty nice. So we at least tried to make those connection points that were pretty logical. And I think we're always gonna search out for those, especially to your point. You got to block a sidewalk that's connecting to another one that we're doing. Can we fill in the gap somewhere? It'll all come down to cost. I think we'll definitely want to try to do that. But we just kind of have to see how projects are bidding out this year. Yeah, I won't forget that. Believe me, the big sidewalk guy. And I mean, and honestly, that's what a lot of these projects are. It's creating more pedestrian activity. It's really putting a lot of investment into the old town of North Plains, which I find is pretty cool. And we actually, I say that is one of our equity tools in North Plains, is kind of the older streets, older homes, older neighborhoods that don't have the fancy new investment of new subdivisions. That's kind of what we're trying to do with our dollars in this bond. So okay, TDT fund, transportation development tax. This is one we need to clean up. Actually, just discussed this today. The McKay Bridge, we need to do a journal entry that will go into the West Union pet path project that was completed last year. So we'll clean that up. So this opening fund balance will be reduced here a little bit at the beginning, but it's going to contribute $1.2 million in some of our transportation bond funds. That's going to be for 313th Avenue projects. That's on our that's a project that was in our TSP that was identified for using transportation development tax funds, and also street sidewalks, which is good. Anytime you want to spend TDT funds, you have to have it on the county's TDT list, and you have to go to the Washington County Coordinating Committee, it's basically a transportation committee, to tell them what you want to spend your funds on. So I will do that this year, but the projects are identified on the county's TDT list. So these two made a lot of sense, and I'll just come forward and say that's our plan to spend them. So what we're doing here is, since we're putting sidewalks on both sides of Pacific Street, costs went up quite a bit, but we'll be able to use TDT funds for that and the transportation bond. This one also contributes to our finance and administration fund. All of our SCCs take a lot of staff time to for administrative overhead, for sending them out to homeowners, getting working with them on the calculation of SCCs or TDTs. And then we have to do a report for the county. What is your TDT report? What is your TDT credit report? So all that takes time and effort, and AP time and all those things too. Bryn Hill alone is projected to raise 3.5 million in TDT revenues in the biennium, which is good because TDTs are just gonna help us with future capacity projects in town. You heard from Commissioner Willie, whatever happens with the instep, and if we do an intersection improvement here, if we get a roundabout, I'm not expecting the full amount anymore that they were talking about. So we may have to contribute some TDT funds, and it's good to have some reserved for future expenditure for a project like that. Okay, any questions about that one? Chris, you good? We can't see you, but see a thumbs up. So. And I think Council. Okay.
This might be off topic, maybe not. Wasco Road. Sorry, Lloyd.
There we go.
Wasco. I just remembered that, and I wanted to bring it to your attention, and I know when Councilor Page was talking about sidewalks. I've talked to several residents on Wasco that does not go to it. And I think that's on our TSP. But I know that there's higher interest now to punch that road through. There's
Really?
interest to get that road to go through. So
Okay. It's definitely on the CIP. It's on the latter end of our 6-year CIP. It was year 5 or 6 or something like that. Yeah.
okay.
That was also gravel too.
I'm sorry.
Their roads gravel too. It's a weird road. So it has a lot of money.
It's not big.
It's not big.
It's not big.
Like oiled. Yeah. So. But that's interesting though, if they have an high interest and we don't have any potential funding identified for that, that could always be an LID project to punch that through and to pave it too. So. All right, this is not working to talk and do that. At the same
I know
time.
it's random, but.
Nope. No, so we're good. Well, I mean, okay, yeah. Okay, Parks Capital Fund. This is funded overwhelmingly from system development charges, and as the theme with everything else, it's mostly going to be from Bryn Hill. That's the majority of our buildable land in the next 2 years. They'll net close to $1 million in parks STCs for the biennium. Really, the only identified capital projects as of now is a contribution to the Public Works building, and then maybe doing some sort of conversion to one of our older parks into a dog park. I think that still takes studying. I go back and forth on this all the time. Every time I think, oh, Pacific Purple Park could be, it's illogical. It's a park. It could be a dog park. It is so wet that sometimes I'll sit there in bed at night thinking, how many people would call me to say they hate the park because their dogs all have muddy paws? So I just go back and forth on it all the time. I really do. And maybe what we do is just, next Public Works director comes with a background in clean water services. Maybe we study that a little bit more and just look at what filling it in, at least partially. Maybe even the front half, what that would look like, because that back half is, I just can't imagine how much money we would have to put into that to keep that dry year round.
Yeah, I'm not that engineer, but something that drains and creek. I think it's a drain there.
Yeah.
Pipe or-
Yeah, some sort of French, yeah, some sort of.
Yeah.
Right. But it's I mean, we had the wetland delineation takes up most of that part too. So this is where a water engineer would know better. Like you're always going to get seepage there. That water table is higher than you think. So I don't know, but I just know that it can be a money pit too. So anyway, there's some money earmarked for doing that. There's been talk about making Frank Wing Park near the old water tank, the old reservoir, the dog park there too. There's parking there for it, and it is a park. It would definitely be a small dog park because it's a smaller park. But it could probably get some more usage out of it too. That's one way to do it. So these are things the Parks Board talking over. But as of now, in the next 2 years, not a lot of projects earmarked, but we will have to be doing a parks plan, master plan update over the next 2 years too, I think, as we get through all of the concept planning for the UGB. Okay, so nothing exciting there, but the Parks Board would come up with some project ideas, I would think. Okay, any questions on that? Not. Okay, and I think, yep, this is our last SDC fund with water, 2.2 million in SDC revenues are projected from the Brynhill development there. Again, doing a master plan update for water too. Frankly, with the urban growth boundary expansion, there will probably be a lot of water planning. We kind of talked about this before. Even looking at another source for the city, we've definitely been investigating that. If that's something we need to do with the expansion. So we're hopeful there that some of those monies would come out of the legislature to do some of that planning, but that's something we're working on right now. But these are some of the capital projects in here's contributing to one main replacement and upsizing, and then 313th and 313th South and 313th North are each getting some road work done, and they're going to get water lines replaced there. And when we do the Hillcrest overlay, that's also going to have a water line replacement there. And all of these are coming from the water master plan identified projects list. So we'll be spending more than we take in over this biennium just from these list of projects. Still have about $2.2 million up to the end of the biennium for reserves for future expenditures. Oh, and the loan on the water tank, the debt service is split between water SDCs and the water fund coming from water rates. And then there will be a contribution. The largest SDC contribution comes from water to go to the public works building, and that's just because it has the most FTEs and it is going to have a lot of the water operations, materials, services, meters, and things like that on site. Any questions with the water SDC fund? In the public works building, this one's fairly simple. It's comprised of the 3 SDC capital funds contributing their share according to the SDC study. And then we have a $5 million grant from the state of Oregon in lottery bonds. That fund, those monies are actually available next month for the first time. So we can start getting reimbursed for all of our expenses going towards this project. For a total project of 6.8. I'm hoping we don't need all of that, but these are all reserved revenues and expenditures. Now we have discovered the soils in that site are about as good as they were for the water tank, but we'll be going through a lot of the value engineering. I've already started doing that for what they may take. The good news is, if you think of 1.8 or 2 million gallons of water, that's much heavier than a building will be. So it won't need nearly the same foundational improvements needed there. So that it'll be a fraction of what that was. Okay, and I think, this is just cursory. We used to have a TIP fund, transportation impact fee. We have to keep it on the books for Oregon budget law for 2 years after it's closed out. So the next biennium, you won't see anything there, but this is just a state budget law requirement. Nothing, no revenues, nothing to spend. You want to go through this, Bill?
I can, certainly. Okay, so the ARPA fund, following up with the priorities and allocations that you all adopted actually back in December, it was either November, December, I believe it was December. Yes.
I think we missed the vehicle and equipment reserve fund.
No, it's okay. We'll start with the vehicle, equipment and reserve fund. So, thank you, Mayor. Most departments, who really kind of have facility or vehicle need, allocate savings to be put into this fund that close out of each fiscal year. It's been done that way for a very long time, and the different departments have accumulated, some balances. The last notable vehicle purchase that was made was the electric vehicle that we generally use at City Hall, and that was 2 or 3 years ago. There hasn't really been a vehicle purchase from this fund. Even though for a few years, a number of years, the different departments, particularly Public Works, have been putting money into this fund. So in this budget, we do have in the biennium the replacement of 2 service trucks budgeted to be spent out of this fund for Water Street's day-to-day use. And then at some point in the biennium, the library is actually also built up a good bit of reserve and hasn't made any kind of vehicle purchase. I could go back and find one. So we have it in the budget for them to, with all of their staff, to be able to buy through this fund some sort of electric car or something for different transportation. So those will be the first vehicle purchases, at least as they're budgeted here for the funding. The first ones in a while for at least since the City Hall purchase. So, but that's just a function of the different departments kind of putting socking money in it, and that's all that this fund really pays for. Except for City Hall, if we do kind of major repairs or major improvements, and there haven't been very big ones really in a while. But this fund also does get money put away by the general government, or what used to be the general government department, the finance and administration, what it's called now. That department also sucks money away, and that's primarily for kind of any kind of maintenance in City Hall.
Yeah, car that was, you checked it out, was stolen and damaged. Was that in there?
That the vac truck replacement that was stolen and damaged, that was all just repair expense.
Insurance proceeds.
It was insurance, it was funded through insurance.
In this fund, it was just a water fund, insurance. Revenue and then expenditures through the water fund. This one is primarily for entirely new purchase. Okay, so go back to our plan.
Sorry for missing that.
No, it's okay. Actually,
Oh.
we skipped to, yeah,
Uh,
there we go. Okay, so based on council's priorities for the ARPA funds that you all adopted in December, as well as what now, and kind of leading to that, were far more flexible usage rules for the ARPA funds. The budget here for the biennium, we have a number of expenditures that have been experienced in this biennium with the fund. Based on different needs that have come up, but all expenditures over this biennium with ARPA monies have been kind of categorized now in this budget according to your stated priorities. So everything's kind of been classified in expenditures we've already had, but have been classified to follow under the priorities that you set forward with the funds. And then in the budget looking forward over the next 2 years, budget has been allocated very specifically following kind of how you allocated it in plan in December. Some of those things are expenditures through the fund. Different purchases by the library have been accounted for in this fund as just kind of expenditures by the fund. Other things have been treated as transfers over to a different department from ARPA for that earmarked, whatever the earmarked purpose is. So you kind of see a bunch of different expenditure line items, kind of a mix of transfers or direct account expenditures, and that's why It's kind of been handled in a few different ways, because of how we assign account numbers to different things. But we are planning for the fund to be fully expended by the end of the including any interest that might have been gained on unspent balance.
Just did that one.
Did that one. So I think urban renewal.
We need to take 5 or any, that concludes the city's budget presentation.
Well, I don't think we plan on taking any action on this tonight. So we'll table the discussion on the budget, especially since we have a number of missing committee members. We'll table that until May 3rd. At 6 p.m. here at Jesse Mays. And with that, we're adjourned and we'll take a, go ahead.
If I may, is there anything right now, any other information or any follow-up, any questions that we need to chase down? Like, we took a few notes, but if there's anything else to clarify, we may clean up a couple things between now and then, some things that we discovered over this in preparing this. If we do, we'll just note those.
Well, and in my mind, if there's anything that individuals have, either here or on the Zoom call, that they get that to you, because I do have, I have some. I want to take a little deeper look at some of the contributions. I mean, I don't see anything glaringly that, at least from my perspective, that we can't live with, but I think there's room for a little more discussion on some of these things, and some of them we may want to go into more details. So it's nice to, instead of having sidebars in the discussion, to point those things to you to specifically address, and then we could go over those things when we next before we start into the next phase of looking at that document. Don't you agree?
That works for me.
Okay. With that, we're adjourned now, and we'll take let's see, at 8:20. So 5 minutes, we'll reconvene for the URA agency budget. Thank you. Okay, at 8:21, we're going to call the meeting of the budget committee for the URA agency, or the urban renewal agency, proposed 2023-2025 biennial budget to order, and we'll dispatch with the other items and go right into nominations. We have 2 offices we have to elect, one being chair, one being vice chair. Current chair is myself, plus Sheldon, and the current vice chair is Cameron Martinez. So with that, I'll entertain a motion for nominations of chair.
Motion to nominate Russ Sheldon for chair.
I'll second. I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to nominate Russ Sheldon as chair of the Urban Renewal Agency of the City of North Plains for the 2023-2025 biennial. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. Hearing none opposed, the motion is carried. Thank you. So at this time, I'll entertain nominations for vice chair of the Urban Renewal Agency.
Does somebody have to be here for that?
Not necessarily. Cameron as well. Somebody else would like to serve?
I nominate Cameron as vice chair. Second.
Here, then a motion has been made and seconded to nominate Cameron Martinez as the vice chair of the Urban Renewal Agency for the June term of 2023 to 2025 biennium. Is there any discussion? There are none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. There are none opposed, the motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, and with that, we're going to go ahead and start on our Urban Renewal Agency biennial budget discussion for the term of 2023 to 2025. I'll turn it over to Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, newly elected chair, Sheldon. This one's pretty simple. We have one slide to summarize the Urban Renewal Agency. I'll cede the floor to Bill here in a second, but I'll just say, work with the developer, which we're still trying to do on that, and then seeking out other properties this biennium. Trying to get more active with that. We got a newly adopted downtown, recommended adopted downtown planning commission and going to the city council. So we have some projects and implementation programs to work with there. We're trying to get a little bit more active with the Urban Renewal Agency, and I'll let Bill kind of talk about what the programs are and the projected expenditures to go along with those.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, so the URA is going to be far more active over the next 2 years than it has been. And the purchase of the property across from City Hall is just kind of one of those things. But kind of the big things that we're budgeting and planning for the Urban Renewal Agency to do, we are putting in enough of a budget for, it's not a big expense item, but it is something to be budgeted for, and that is a substantial amendment to the Urban Renewal Plan and agency. We talked about it a little bit, and we'll mention it again. The plan was done in 2006, adopted in 2007, which means 2027 is the sunset date on the agency being able to do any more borrowing, and therefore really any projects anymore. And so it's time to take that up and look into extending the sunset date. And we have a new downtown plan, not yet adopted, but will be considered by you all very soon. We have an urban growth boundary expansion coming up, and Hillsborough very successfully utilized urban renewal to help pay for some of their key infrastructure expansion, water in particular, moving into the North Hillsborough industrial area that currently has been building out very rapidly over the last 3 or 4 years. So we budgeted in for the URA to, as part of a substantial amendment, to extend the sunset date, to also take a look at, with the city growing, should the geography of the Urban Renewal Agency, the district change? Should we take some property out and put some new property in? What role, if any, should the Urban Renewal Agency, or a district, take part in helping with the infrastructure expansion? And what might that cost, and how might that be financed, that sort of thing. So we're kind of at a critical point where a number of different things that URAs are involved in, we kind of need to look at them all. And so let's go ahead and kick off that substantial amendment process. So we're looking at doing that in FY24 for sure. We do have budget in there for helping out with sidewalk infill, and very specifically $1 million we just kind of put into the budget during the biennium for what downtown improvement plan short-term projects will likely be prioritized with adoption of the downtown plan. So we've set aside some money for that, certainly. We have money in for future real estate purchases in the biennium. I believe it's $1 million for that as well. We also have some money set aside and budgeted for what we're calling the new food service tenant improvement grant program. We kind of visited with you a bit about that. But we may, depending on how that goes, we might explore, that program evolving or doing something that might very specifically help with food trucks or with, farmers market, that sort of thing. We're not quite there yet, but we wanted to kind of put some budget allocation into those kind of programs. So that's what we propose. And then we have allocated, we are kind of budgeting revenue from selling the Glencoe Opportunity Area property for potentially half of is kind of $2 million price tag, depending on how costs come in from the developer on some of the general contractor bids that they're just getting now. We kind of emailed them recently, and they're just kind of getting their costs in now. So we'll hear soon about that. But we've kind of budgeted in some revenue reflecting that we may consider incentivizing the development depending on how high costs have gotten. With a reduced sale price of the property to kind of help that project potentially. So we've set aside budget for that to be able to happen as well. And those are kind of the big projects or allocations that we propose budgeting for with urban renewal. And that's, again, it just a multifaceted kind of activities that we'll be taking on in the next 2 years compared to what it has been. So we're looking at activating it even more.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
With the Glencoe, still might be lowered to help us with the cost. Is there anything you could do to capture that back, maybe by having like for next, maybe having it so it's time based, so for the startup period of 5 years to be a lower cost, and then I don't know, maybe has something to go further. Is there something that would be even right now and to any kind of mechanism for that?
Thank you, Councilor. Good question. I'm in kind of looking at it. I'm unaware of any kind of approaches that other cities have done to that. I think what we wanted to do with the budget was just to kind of put it into the budget that we could afford to write down the value of the property up to half. I mean, our goal is to sell the property for as much as possible, and that their project pencils as much as possible on their own. But we have it in the budget that we can take up to, we can write down the property's value up to half, but not the goal of it being write it down up to half. The way other cities look at it really is what's the payback period on getting that money back that might have been sunken into it in terms of revenue created after the fact.
Right. It hasn't been like 20 years now.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the thing about this project, about the Glencoe project, is that, we know from Lennar, we know from people who have communicated with the city about wanting to move to North Plains. They're hesitant to, they would rather the city have a grocery store first. And I think we really look at the project as something certainly that enhances quality of life for residents by actually getting a full service grocery store here. But the indication we've gotten is that it's kind of been a broader obstacle than that to not have a grocery store. So we see it as being part of being a better place to locate a business, to have more services for employees, not just filling the immediate need for residents to have a grocery store. So we kind of look at the payoff a little bit more broad. But again, our goal here. I don't want to write down the value of the property. I don't want to see it happen. But we want to try to kind of budget for the possibility, I guess, is the bottom line.
Right now, we get no property tax revenue from it because we own the property. So we'll start generating some, better than what we're getting. But
Question, is there any interest in the property? I mean, in people looking for that 5 acres? I mean, you don't have to be a grocery store, but just instead of writing it off half, I can take it out and give somebody else a chance at it. I don't know.
I would like to see it be a grocery store and try to see if we can make the original intent on it work. 2022, I think I've said this before, was a rough year trying to get costs in line, and some of the tenants, I think they're gonna have to go back and look at some of their plans. A hardware store, for instance, be a nice need in this community, but a hardware store paying market rates in new construction is they found it a little tougher than an Ace or True Value playing rent in an older facility. Makes a big difference between $18 a square foot and $26 per square foot. Those are some of the things that they were running up against. I'd prefer to give Rimbold a little bit more time to see what all their new bids have borne out at the beginning of this year, and we may have to reassess by summer if it's just not looking like it's going to work out there. Grocery stores they're kind of tough too.
Yeah, because you only have 2 left.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of consolidation.
I mean, I was in the Safeway, I mean, I don't know who else to do.
Yeah, we're looking for, and we would be getting kind of a smaller, smaller niche.
Yeah, it was the same with the agency, same company.
Well, my opinion is we stay the course.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ancillary benefits to this development, and I think part of writing it down is part of how we make progress, and that's the intent of building renewal. It isn't to make money necessarily, and certainly who wants to give up any dollar, especially the public dollar, but when there's a reward, we have to think about that possibility and not the limitations of what making some concession might be. I think the goal in the beginning was, I think this budget allows us to do that, if in fact we need to do that. But I think by and large, our first and best offer is probably on the table, and I'm hoping that we'll see this through.
For the record, I would agree. I see that project as important for our downtown success. Is we gotta have a marquee project that gets people to North Plains, gets them off the highway, gets people excited here. They get excited to see something else transfer to downtown. And those two are connected in my mind, really.
Yeah, I think they're tangential. So I think we're on the right path, and I think as far as where the budget's at, because we don't have a lot of members here, I don't see us wanting to take action on it tonight. I think we can. We certainly have, but we have consensus. But I think we should also table this until 8 May in the second phase of budget discussion. Unless there's a compelling interest there to move on this tonight, I would certainly take a motion for that as well. Okay, is there any additional questions? I'd say based on the lack of a motion to move on the urban renewal agency budget, unless there's additional comments or questions, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 8:38. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Payton. Thank you, Chris.
Good night, Rich. Good night.
Have a good night.
Yeah.